one of the ways we could describe the difference or the importance of this broader or maybe more integral view of our practice, where the sense of our practice, the relationship to experience and the relationship to reality is one and the same, could describe it as a kind of cosmocentric view or a cosmocentric practice rather than an egocentric view or an egocentric practice. And of course, the idea of an egocentric practice is a kind of complete anathema, right, in the context of the teachings that really are about a relationship with life that is freed from self-centeredness, self-preoccupation, self-obsession, self-criticism, and just selfing, the ongoing kind of reinforcing of the idea of me. So that's such a central tenet to Buddhist practice, that the idea of an egocentric practice is sort of ridiculous, right? And yet, if one doesn't have these cosmocentric elements, thanks, Matt. Cosmocentric means from the point of view of the whole of the cosmos, right? Whereas egocentric means from the point of view of me. So if we don't have these cosmocentric elements, these elements that give us a sense of a place in a wider world, or maybe a sense of ourselves as an expression of the whole of existence, then we are just, we are left with I, me, and my. And so it's worth reflecting, just for yourself, how much is my sense of my practice self-referential? Me doing my practice to relieve my problems, to get my benefits, etc. And it's totally understandable that that might be the case. And part of this sort of baby bathwater thing I spoke about earlier is the way these practices have been increasingly laicified, right? Made more accessible to lay people like us, which is great. Also more and more secularized, right? Which again helps make them more and more accessible, but can strip out maybe some of the cosmocentrism, some of the sense of the sacred, and then also increasingly psychologized. So that we might take up meditation as a tool for psychological well-being. And hey, there's nothing wrong with that. We could do with a bit more of psychological well-being. And yet there is a danger, right, in that stripping out, that we end up practicing what we might see as a primarily psychological practice, right? Me and my mental health, for example, or me and developing emotional intelligence. These are kind of some of the things that go along in the kind of mindfulness world. And increasingly, the last couple of decades, mindfulness, I think we've probably passed peak mindfulness now. In the culture, there was, for a while, we were tracking the amount of books published about mindfulness, and it was a steep experiential curve. And then I think it was 2023 was the first year, there were less, thank God, less books about mindfulness published than the year before. Until then, it was going up and up and up and up. And now, it seems like when I say peak mindfulness, I mean mindfulness has hit its peak, sort of being in vogue, the latest, greatest thing in the sort of self-development world. And then it's moved on to whatever, ayahuasca. Amongst, that's having its moment in the sun. And then, and various other things as well. But in the course of in the build-up to peak mindfulness, which was, again, I'm not trying to be dismissive or critical of that, in as much as the fantastic thing of making these kinds of practices accessible, and maybe that was a way in for some of you through, an MBSR class or through an app, etc. It was all good ways in, and if we want to deepen a practice, fill out a practice, have a practice that isn't merely psychological, isn't merely egocentric, then we need ways that of actually explicitly, consciously bring in this sense of a wider field of practice, a wider field of experience, a wider sense of belonging, etc. Things we were speaking about this morning. So I thought maybe one of those things in the tradition is the contemplation of the elements. So I thought maybe we can sit together a little bit and just include the elements. Sometimes they're taught as 4 elements, sometimes as with the 5th element. Right? So the 4 elements being the sense that everything is made up of the 4 elements: fire, water, air, earth, air. Right? And when that means everything, well, that means everything in what we call outer, everything we can see and hear arises out of the elements. And equally, the sense of contemplating that, not so much in an abstract or objectifying way, but rather in a more inward or intimate or subjective way, like, oh yeah, this which I call me, actually, only where I look for what I call me, what do I find? I find earthiness. So in terms of one's direct experience, the weight of body, the density of sensation, that's the earth element, right? As well as the actual physicality of bones and flesh, that's earthy. But then, so there's a combination of the physical element, but the experiential element, earthy, weighty, dense, heavy. And then the water element, so physically, blood and the fact that we're some big percent water, but that's still sort of an idea. And then experientially, the experience of fluidity in the body, the sense of the way things move and flow, the wateriness that we can feel, in the eyes and the nostrils and in the mouth. So we have this very direct, non-conceptual, immediate experience of earthiness, heaviness, density, of wateriness, right? Fluidity, movement, of fieriness, heat. The digestion is seen often as a central expression of the heat element, the digestive fires. And then it just experientially, an alive body is a warm body. And that experience of temperature, the fact that our core is usually warmer than our extremities, and we can actually feel that sense of heat, fieriness, warmth. And then the air element. And the air element, objectively, the space between things, the fact that we're breathing in air. And then experientially, the air element. And this breath that is so directly and powerfully something that dissolves or can dissolve our sense of inner and outer. Is the breath inner or outer? And it would be ridiculous to try to reduce it to one or the other, wouldn't it? No, the breath is the constant intermingling of what we call outer and what we call inner. And in a way, the air element, this kind of swelling of the body, like the way the breath just kind of constantly enlivening us, oxygenating the cells, enlivening the organism, and then an out breath, inviting a kind of softening, a relaxing. What else is there? We tend to not think in terms of our experience in elemental terms. We think of it in terms of body, right? And body is an idea, right? It's not a very refined description of our direct experience. Do you experience a thing called body? Or do you actually experience density and heaviness and movement and flow and temperature and breath? And we actually experience this elemental life. So contemplating our experience through the elements is a way of moving from the egocentric, me, my body, my experience, to the cosmocentric, belonging to the elements, this fieriness, this earthiness, this wateriness, this airiness. And that's like I was saying this morning about the way the shrine is a way of kind of remembering and evoking and honouring those elements. And in the sense of honouring the elements internally, honouring the elements externally. It's also a way of that bridging that sense of caring. To care for ourselves, to care for others, to care for the world, to care for the earth. A way in which those are not different things. To care for life. The naturalness then that comes on out of caring for life, caring for elemental life. And so sometimes things are just presented in terms of those four elements, right, which make up everything. And then, so what's the fifth element? What's the fifth element? It's hard to name the fifth element, so we might call it consciousness or awakeness, like we've been referring to this morning. Right? But the fact that all of this elemental life is somehow animated, that there's intelligence is sort of the wrong word because it's a bit of a human term, intelligence. But there's this animating principle, right, that makes the leaves grow in the springtime and fall off in the autumn. That makes us age according to the nature of things. Makes our nails grow and then makes our hair grey and fall out. And then makes the same kind of things. Makes however good our eyesight is. And I remember being really confident in my 40s that I had really good eyesight. And then, sure enough, just about right on cue, 48, 49, I started to do this, reading things. It's like, oh yeah, it's in the nature of things. It's like it's completely right. So this sort of, we might anthropomorphize it a little bit, this intelligence, like by calling it God and by having images of God that are very anthropomorphic. We might prefer to leave it as something nameless. And yet here, in the midst of this elemental experience, in the midst of the earthiness and wateriness and airiness and fieriness of everything, and in the midst of the experiential contact with that, density, movement, temperature, breath, there's something that we can't really be named, can't be made sense of, absolutely cannot be objectified. It means made into an object, something that we can know or touch or conceive of, and yet which is absolutely, evidently, clearly in the midst of, or is the very essence of all this elemental life.